all for being here. Uh, Little story, when Mira asked me to introduce Dr. Strayhorn, I kind of was a little flustered with what I was going to say. But earlier in the semester, I got to attend the Subaru Sense of Belonging training that they had here at the university. I was really excited because when we got down into the research, Dr. Strayhorn was mentioned on the research. His publications were what we were studying when we were talking about the data and how it was impacting our university. So when we had the opportunity to discuss, we decided to bring him here. I'm happy that he's here, the provost and senior vice president at Virginia Union University, and he's going to take it away.
Thank you very much. And good afternoon to everyone, depending on where you are in the world. I guess for those in our viewing audience, it could be morning, night, noon, I'm not sure. Thank you, Katie. Round of applause to Katie, please, for her wonderful introduction. And so greatly appreciate. Now, when I realized I was going to speak here and that you were probably going to have something to do with it, I was not flustered about the opportunity to celebrate the good work that you've done in higher education, and certainly the good work that you did at Virginia Union University, where I served as, that was me, provost and senior vice president for academic affairs, also professor, tenure full professor in the School of Education, and the director for the Center for the Study of HBCUs. But most importantly for me today, I'm going to tell you right now, I'm not going to be able to control my energy because one, I got lost trying to find Thornton Hall. Because I had nothing to do with Thornton Hall when I was an undergrad here at the University of Virginia. But somewhere in my bio, you might not know this, I am an alum, a two-time alum of the University of Virginia. I attended undergrad here, earned my bachelor's in music and religious studies, which simply meant I had to go to graduate school. And I did go, I didn't even know this until someone just said it, Ruffner, it's not that anymore, but School of Education being across the street. I've got to like get around because I think I forgot campus a little bit. But I was finishing up my undergraduate degree. I went over to the Curry School of Education at the time and met Annette Gibbs, who was the director of the higher ed program for so many years. And I said, you know, look, I got my undergrad here. I want to get my master's here. I want to get my doctorate here. I love UVA. I'm going to stay here forever. And she said, with no, you know, I'm not even paraphrasing. She was like, no, you won't, young man. And she's like looking down at me, but not hard to do because I'm such a fun size. And she's like pointing down at me. She said, no, you got to go get some work experience. And so I said, I'll show you. So I went to a different program, the Master's in Ed Policy. Was at the time a relatively new program. So I earned my master's in ed policy at the School of Education, and then came back to Annette and said, see, now I have a master's degree, you'll let me into the doctoral program. She said, no, you will still go get some work experience. So I went off to DC to work for the Council of Graduate Schools to get work experience because I very much intended to come back to UVA and earn my doctoral degree in higher ed. But while at the Council of Graduate Schools, I met someone who you may not recognize the name at first, but Karen DePaul, who at the time was graduate dean at Washington State University. She was a major driver, major player. She goes on to be the dean in residence at the Council of Graduate Schools at some point. But at the time she's at Wash State. And Karen, as a research associate, I was working with Karen on a special project, and Karen goes on to Virginia Tech to become the graduate dean. And so I go to Virginia Tech instead of UVA, forgive me, to get my doctoral degree. And then the currents of life have it such that I would start my career as a professor at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, move to Ohio State University, now move into senior level administration. And while along the way, be blessed and fortunate enough that my research about historically underrepresented students in STEM environments, looking at issues of race, identity, and their intersections, and coming out of that work with this insight about this factor, this lever, this variable called sense of belonging that really does drive student success. And I start writing about it. And as one of our colleagues just mentioned, went to a conference and got to speak with him about these matters, that at some point in time, I've been a lot of places, lots of campuses, lots of colleges, thousands of them. I've never been to UVA before. And so today I'm at UVA and my mom is so happy for me. I mean, it's like a coming home of sorts. So that was just my way of saying if I act really hyper, it's not because that's not even my drink, actually. It's not because I had too much caffeine. It's simply because I'm excited to be back at a place where I belong, in a place where I got started. And so I told my team, don't book me for the day because after I'm done, I got to go to Old Cabell Hall because I was a music major. But I was not only a music major, I was a member, an active member of Black Voices. And so I was retained at UVA in part because of Thursday nights in Old Cabell Hall, where I met with students who weren't music majors and weren't religious study majors, but biology and chemistry and engineering and communications all over the place. And we sat in a space that we created for ourselves. I mean, you provided the buildings, UVA provided the buildings, but we created the space, co-created the space where we could let our hair down. I didn't have this much hair then, where we could talk freely, sometimes through song, about our struggles here at a really wonderful, incredible institution, but like most, not perfect, right? And so we got to talk about the experiences inside the classroom, outside the classroom, and we got to talk in a space where our experiences were affirmed, not questioned, where we weren't forced to have a tough skin, but it was okay to be emotional, even as a Black dude. And that sometimes with tears in my eyes while singing hymns, or sometimes while playing the piano and watching the tears in the eyes of my colleagues, we could understand that these words for songs, hymns, prayers took on heightened importance for us, were much more than the words we were singing about. So I write about this in 2011 in the Journal of College Student Development. There's a piece that I write about Black gospel choirs, and I'm writing about my studies of Black voices here at UVA. Which for me was part of the retention strategy. So if anybody's trying to retain Black students, we got to pay attention to things like the gospel choir. You know, I was not an engineering major, but some of you might know the name Jeff Sears. Jeff Sears came to UVA from my high school, Kempsville High School in Virginia Beach, Virginia. He goes on to be an engineering major. Jeff, who was my friend in high school, picked a different major. I think I picked the best one, but he picked engineering. It's absolutely fine. I still love him to this day. But Jeff introduced me to NSBE, the National Society of Black Engineers. And Jeff invites me, not because I'm an engineer, not because I ever intend to be an engineer, but just because there are times when I'm at UVA as an undergrad where I'm looking for other career-oriented, academically oriented men of color. And he promises I can meet them there. All right, so this is why belonging is so important to me. And so I want to talk for a little bit about belonging research, drop in some theory, offer some examples, and then stop so that we can have some time for Q&A and discussion. If you have questions along the way, don't worry about raising your hand or stopping me. First, I got slides that will keep me on track. But secondly, because if you leave today convinced that one, it is February 28th, and it's the last day of formally federally recognized Black History Month, then I've accomplished my goal. The second is if you leave knowing anything at all about sense of belonging from research and theory, then I've accomplished my goal. Third, if you're still awake at the end of this, I've also accomplished my goal. So those are my three. I've got a really low bar in a sense, but I'm hoping that this will be the first of several conversations. It sounds like you had others. I know that there are folks here from the Office of Diversity. And so, longtime friend and colleague and collaborator, Dr. McDonald is always available. I think he and his team do excellent work. It's why I'm so glad to see him as a partner in this and looking forward to the work that we might accomplish here. So let me then talk a little bit about what we're here for today. And I'm hoping that, can I have a t-shirt? Okay, cool. I was going to take one, but I was like, I don't know if those are, there's no sign that says take one. So just remember there's a t-shirt over there. Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, this is about belonging though, right? Already into it. When you're new to a place, even if you've been there before, you don't know the rules. And so belonging is scientific and it is theoretical. And I've written 2 books about it and I'm finishing a 3rd about it. And I'm not done. I mean, there's like so much more to talk about. But listen, it does boil down to some really basic kinds of things. And so I heard someone say, you know, good note. Yeah. So when we put signs out that say, take one, sit here, go this way, go that way, that is fostering belonging. Because it's hard to feel like you belong in a place where you don't know where stuff is and you don't know how things happen and you don't know the rules of engagement, the terms of engagement. You don't know where to park. But it's okay. It's okay. If my car gets towed, it's fine. It's going to be a heavy car, so they probably just leave it there. But you know, these are the things that we can do, just mechanics. And it's not just campus-wide, although I've already pointed to some campus, you know, so I've gone to campuses and have been working with some campuses that are investing in, you know, wayfinding strategies. And that's important for a student to feel like they belong, so that they know where the math class is. But, you know, now that we're learning in person, online, and hybrid, I'm also consulting with campus. I'm trying to figure out, how do you help students navigate a virtual campus where those wayfinding signs might look different? And so we got to think about this, because we've created this new environment where students who have been with us for a long time may still not know now where to access resources. So that's the purpose of this conversation, bring us together to talk about it. But I would be remiss if I didn't celebrate. I mean, I'm having dinner with 2 of my best friends later tonight because it's Black History Month. And as a Black man living in America, who's every single year understanding how important it is to acknowledge the contributions of Black Americans and Black people to this world, I don't want this day to go without pausing for a moment to think about some of the connections of life. Now, I'm going to try to deliver the next 2 minutes of my talk without crying, but I got to tell you, it's pretty powerful. I'm an undergrad at the University of Virginia. Emmerich Turner is the Dean of African-American students here at the time. And he brings a speaker to campus to talk with us. But I'm an undergrad. I'm a first-year student, by the way. And so, I mean, like most first-year students, except any in the room who are really, really focused, I apologize. I was not. My first year, it was like, oh my gosh, I'm away from my parents. This is so exciting. I don't know where to get started. Not the library, though. You know, and so I went to the cookout, and I was in that first group of first-year students who lived on Hereford Hill in Hereford College. So I'm a first-year student who lives in Hereford. So I'm away from it all. But that ends up being very good for me. But I have really good connections with people. Anyway, the speaker's there and they're talking about this name that I've never heard, some woman who helped desegregate the state of Virginia, largely through higher education. And her name is Alice Jackson Stewart, who is the first African-American to apply for admission to graduate school at the University of Virginia, my alma mater. She applies to get a master's in French. Why? Because at the time, 1935, right? So UVA starts admitting women in the 20s. She applies because she's a woman. And she's applying to get a master's in French because the state's historically Black colleges and universities, there are 4 of them. 1, Virginia Union, where I work, Norfolk State University, where my mother went, Hampton University, where my mother got her other degree, and then Virginia University in Lynchburg, 4 in Virginia State. So there were 5. And so, and I, you know, I know the provost and president there, but I have no family's ties to Virginia State. So because these institutions don't offer a master's in French, Alice applies to UVA. And she gets, you know, pretty quickly rejected, sort of on a technicality. Not that she's not a woman and that UVA doesn't admit women at the time, but she's a Black woman. And so the rector ends up writing her a letter that says, hopefully you can read this, it is as blurry as it is in print. And by the way, you don't have to, you know, squint for this. I'm hoping to have an opportunity. So I was a summer fellow at the Du Bois Center here and did a summer project over in the Special Collections Library. And Alice's belongings, all 60 plus boxes, are in the Special Collections Library here at UVA. And so I spent time with Alice, going through her archive and found letters, found all sorts of things. I also found out that the woman that that person was talking about when I was a first year here was Alice. And if I had paid attention, I probably would have realized that we had so many connections over the course of time. So Alice gets rejected. Why? Because the rector says for good and sufficient reasons. One is that the state of Virginia, the Commonwealth of Virginia, had at the time a long established practice of not educating whites and colored persons at the time together. And so that was 1935. And here we are in 2022. And look at the university and how it's changed across all of its programs and schools. And look at the diversity and the inclusion that we now foster and promote and celebrate at the university. I'm not saying that there's not a lot more work to be done, but it just shows you the time that we traveled. When Alice gets rejected, the NAACP is starting this effort of, fighting predominantly white institutions in the South who keep rejecting all of these Black applicants. And so the Commonwealth of Virginia, which is also my home state, rather than reconsider Alice's admission, starts a state policy. So for anybody who's studying policy, ed policy, higher ed policy, this is really interesting. This Commonwealth of Virginia starts this practice of saying, rather than include you, and rather than admit you, we would take state dollars to provide a subsidy for you to just go away and go somewhere else. And there are a lot of Northern institutions at the time who are welcoming African Americans. Maybe welcoming is too strong a word, but at least admitting them. So she goes to Columbia to get a master's in comparative literature. And after she finishes, actually while she's pursuing her master's at Columbia University, and Alice is from Richmond, Virginia, she goes to elementary and high school at what would have been known as Hartshorn College. Hartshorn College is a misnomer because it's actually not only a college. It's actually an elementary, middle, and high school for Black students. That would have been very common at the time. It is physically located right now where Maggie L. Walker High School is in Richmond, Virginia. So if you know anything about Richmond, if I go out of my campus and down the street to the right, I will bump into Alice's elementary school and high school. Used to be Hartshorn, now a part of Virginia Union, but Maggie L. Walker High School. So as she's completing her master's at Columbia, Alice joins the faculty at Virginia Union as a professor of English. And she teaches at Union. She goes on to work at Howard. She goes on to work. So in many ways, Alice's story is a story of desegregation of higher education. It is a story of efforts to change the complexion and the environment here at UVA. It is by no stretch of the imagination that I am here today as an alum to speak because of Alice Jackson. So I celebrate her as part of Black History Month, but I also want to point out that her story is not one of the 1930s. Her story has connections to what we see in higher education today. So to the higher ed students in the room, you have to back me up here. We've seen this all over the country, at UVA, at Harvard, at Michigan, at UCLA, that Black students, though present on campus, don't always feel included and welcomed and celebrated. It's not in the signage. It's not in the marketing materials. Their contributions and presence are not reflected in the curriculum all the time. And these are not just things for people in the social sciences like education and health and psychology, that even in STEM, science, technology, engineering, math fields, there's an opportunity to revise curriculum, build classroom environments and laboratory spaces where people feel valued, a part of the community, celebrated for what they bring, and not always pointed out, ridiculed, or targeted for what they don't have. And so when we not only set up those environments, but also as a provost, I say all the time, I don't do a whole lot these days, one-on-one with students. Yes, I see them as they walk across the campus. I do meet with them, but my work as a provost, as a senior leader, is really around policy development. It's around policies that shape reward structures, personnel decisions, how resources get distributed. And so when I make decisions that are conscious of the fact that I'm trying to foster inclusion, celebrate and recognize the contributions of people who are different, that I'm doing the work of belonging, but I'm also doing the best practices of leadership. And so, I think ultimately all that we have been witnessing in society, and the list goes on, really keeps us focused on what our bottom line is, and that is student success. I say this all the time. As I was driving from Richmond to Charlottesville, so excited, just waving at everybody because I'm going back to Charlottesville. I'm trying to remember which exit is it 136, and it's not. I'm just so excited thinking about my old stomping grounds. And but I say all the time, though I was born in Virginia Beach, Virginia, and I thought about William and Mary, it was when I came to Emmett Street, and at the time I met Marilyn D. Berry, who worked in the Office of Financial Aid. Was going to be like a lifelong friend, friends of my parents, all of that. I met Angelique Godbold, who worked in HR here. I'm meeting all of the Rick Turner, Sylvia Terry. As I'm meeting these people, I'm starting to get connected to the place. I mean, coming across Emmett and looking at the campus, I was like, okay, this is the space for me. I don't know why. It's just big enough, it's fun enough, it's bright enough. But it's when I met the people that I started to really get attached. So too did my mom and dad, which were an important part of the equation. My maternal grandmother also. So I say that because usually people don't come to Charlottesville for the buildings. Historians every now and again, Better Homes and Garden, those kind of folks do. But students and families, especially not people of color, not a whole lot of LGBTQIA folks, not a whole lot of low income or no income people, and not a lot who live at the intersections of all of these, come to grounds to just check out the buildings. They come because what UVA says about itself, what is known about UVA, is you get a world-class education. So I want to remind us that no one comes to Shamrock, Emmett, or any of these streets for any other reason than to be successful academically here. I think it's great. I'm going to find the bookstore again. I'm going to get my t-shirt and my cup. I'm going to find, some other paraphernalia. I just need to stock up again. But the sweatshirt and the bumper sticker, and my dad still has the hat that says "Proud UVA Dad," doesn't compare, pales in comparison to that life-size degree that I hang on my wall proudly. So I think it's important that we foster connections with students. I think it's important that we have social activities and events, but the bottom line of everything that we do has to be connected to our commitment to student success. Because here's what we know, higher education students, is that the return on that investment is greatest for the individual who completes the degree, not the one who came for a course or semester. And although I was celebrating as I walked these grounds, there's a part of me that also recognizes the lives of people who look like me, who were left here, who didn't finish, not in 4 years, not in 5 years, not in 6 years, who have not yet completed their degree, some who started from my high school at Kempsville. And so it's important for us to remember this as we're thinking about how do we craft environments, policies, and programs that foster belonging that lead to student success. Because I'm going to tell you now, it is a crafting job. Belonging doesn't happen automatically. It is shown to be the result of intentional effort. This is student success shown in a diagram. And for those who are taking good notes, one, I'm happy to share them with Katie, who can share with the masses if you want these slides. But this is Vince Tinto's retention model. He built it in the 70s, he revised it in the 90s, and most of us abandoned it in the 2000s, partly because we realized that there are some limitations to this model. Vince says this, that students' decisions to drop out or stay in school are a function of a lot of different factors. Things like their family background. I've already talked about my mom, dad, and grandmother. Their individual attributes. You know, I went to Kempsville High School. I would describe it as an academically oriented high school where most faculty, by the time I'm in 11th and 12th grade, everybody's a doctor. I thought that was true for all students. It was not until I became a scholar of education that I realized how privileged a high school environment I was afforded by this arbitrary decision that my mom and dad made, plopped down in the Kempsville neighborhood. That, you know, my mom tells the story. If she were here, your speaker, she would tell you there were 3 houses that made their final choice set. And they just decided this one house that was across the street from 7-Eleven. So you think I get excited about UVA? You should see me when I see a 7-Eleven. It's like, I'm so excited because I grew up across the street from one, right? It's like childhood memories come alive. But my mom and dad decided to buy that house. And because they bought that house, going to public schools, I was zoned to go to Kempsville Elementary, middle, in high school. I think I worked hard. My mom and dad did the best they could with what they got. But, you know, I make it to UVA as a student largely because of that decision, because I was provided access to teachers who were teaching inside their field, who were qualified with master's and doctoral degrees. Structured environment. I was just speaking at IC Norcom High School, another high school in Virginia, but I think it's Portsmouth area. And I'm, you know, one of my childhood friends, she's the assistant principal there. So hi, if you're watching. And she's like in the hallway and she's like controlling the crowd. And she's like, get over there, stop, put your mask on. And I told her, I was like, I don't remember all of this when I went to high school. So I called my sister. I was like, did they yell at us in high school? I just forget all this. And it's the consequence of different school environments and neighborhoods and resources and structural racism and other forms of inequity. Not because the students aren't good people, not because they don't deserve a fighting chance to be at UVA, maybe even in the School of Engineering, but just because of life circumstances and how this world is structured. Vince makes a deliberate attempt to explain to us a relatively complex phenomenon using a relatively simplistic model. That as we started using it, we started paying attention to, it's not so important who students are, but important what they do in college. And you'll find this in the literature through 1991 all the way to about 2008. We start drawing these conclusions. But it's not until the late 2000s as we start picking up intersectionality as a framework, as we start picking up other theoretical frames like critical race theory that has now become so taboo, that calls our attention first to identity and the intersections of identities, that people realize, uh-oh, we made a mistake, because what students do actually is shaped by who they are. And who they are today and who they become tomorrow is also influenced by this dynamic process. I sing today partly because I was in Black Voices. But I was in Black Voices partly because I'm Black and I got a voice, but I didn't know what voice meant back then, but because I grew up in a church. And so who I am and what I did, I go on to be a music major, studying first with Scott DeVoe, a jazz musician. But I end up under the tutelage of Kira Gaunt, who's no longer here, but she was an ethnomusicologist. Ethnomusicologist, right? Tongue twister. And she studies girls' double Dutch games and the musicality of that. And it turns out that the timbre and the meter of our little girls playing double Dutch is similar to the sound of the Black church. And so my connections around Black church and musicality connect with hers in a cultural sense that makes UVA and Old Cabaholic this exciting place for me to finally study things that matter to me. Who I am and what I do are connected. The same is true for students in engineering, that their aspirations for their degree, how they think about the curriculum, is shaped by who they are. We have a colleague, all of us, at the University of Michigan, Nancy Love, and actually she's between institutions, but you know, at some point in her tenure when she's at Michigan, she and I meet at a NSF conference. Nancy is an environmental engineer, so she teaches all sorts of things. But one of the things she teaches is about water filtration processes. So Nancy and I start a pen pal. I write about it in the 2019 book on belonging. And we start this pen pal relationship on email where she's like, okay, look, I get it. Belonging matters. And I want to help because I want more students of color in my class. I want students to feel engaged. You know, I put all this time into these lessons, and when they fall flat, it makes me feel bad as an instructor.
So we end up talking about this says the host muted me, so I don't know if that was intentional, but whatever, I'm not gonna look, I'm just saying. We end up talking about water filtration processes. And Nancy has 2 or 3 that she introduces to her students. She has a demonstration in class where she shows them how to use these with her TAs. And then I said, hey, Nancy, I have a question. Where could students go within a 20, 25-minute period near campus to collect some water? And she starts talking to me about the geography of Ann Arbor. She's at Michigan. But I'm reminded when I was here, it was a professor in religion who did a similar activity talking about material culture. And she sent us on an excursion to the corner to a gift shop to find material culture gift cards. And by using these gift cards and the messages that are embedded in it, she made this lesson that was really, really otherwise boring about material culture come alive. I mean, I reread my articles because she made it so interesting. So I'm talking to Nancy. Nancy says, oh my gosh, in Ann Arbor, they can get to this and they can go to this and they can go to these other residence halls and this other little community just adjacent to campus. I said, oh, I have a great idea. How about you give your students a test tube, give them some time, tell them go, find water, and then meet me back in the laboratory. And she does. And little does she know that she's transformed this otherwise pedantic lesson and science classroom now into a relay race, because students are like, wait, I bet you I can get further than you can and get back in time for lab, which is driving and feeding the athlete in some students, right? And they go in groups and they go individually and they get test tubes of water. Some of them go to residence halls, some of them go to bathrooms, some of them go to local communities or restaurants they visited themselves, and they just get water. And they meet her back. She and her TAs take them through these examples of these 3 filtration techniques, and then they run their experiments, their labs, present their results. Then Nancy and I come up with what I think is probably the best part for the students, and that is, what do these results mean for the people impacted by this water? And that's where you start seeing students in engineering making connections to social problems and social responsibility and issues of identity, both individually and collectively, in a way that now Nancy, I mean, she's gone on to win a couple of awards because of this exercise, but it just gives you an example that identity and what we do, how we think, how we rationalize are all accepted. You can imagine what the students felt like in the classroom when Nancy did this. So these conclusions that we drew over the years just simply told us that model doesn't work. So what we've needed for some time is a model that puts it all together, but is not so boxy, because people don't live in boxes like that. Most of the students that I've studied over my career don't live in boxes, don't want to live in boxes. They've been impacted by the box, having to choose the race box or choose the sexual orientation box. Many of them are part of larger efforts to even ban the box for those who have had contact with the criminal justice system. So the box is a problem for a lot of students that we higher education has opened the doors of access to. So we've needed a model that's not so boxy. That to me is what belonging is. It is a theory. It is a variable. It is, though, also a lever over which we have control. So I'll quickly cover that, in definition, it refers to this sense of social support that students have, that their campus, their classroom, their major, their residence hall, whatever community they aspire to be a member of or believe themselves to be a member of, that there's support there. There's this feeling or sensation of connectedness and feeling cared about and mattering, that they are accepted just as they are, that they're respected for what they bring, that they're valued, and that they are important to the group. So, I've been moving multiple currents of stories along this talk today. I not only celebrated, like my first year of college, as a freshman over on Hereford Hill. But I also had my first child as a freshman here at UVA. Like, and nobody was doing it like that. I mean, literally, well, I don't know people, whatever. You get my point. They weren't even doing it, but they weren't having children. So I'm sitting here like, oh my gosh, I'm expecting a child. And so I end up talking to Angela Davis, who at the time is the Dean of Residence Life. And I talked to her because she's a Black woman. I talked to her because at the time I'm thinking about being an RA. And I talked to her because people said, you can go talk to her and she won't judge you. And I needed to talk to some, I needed all those three conditions to be met. I needed somebody who I thought could just like talk to me real. I needed somebody who would not judge, that I had been judged by everybody. I had been judged by Black voices. I had been judged by my church. I had been judged by my parents. I wanted like no judgment zone. Before no judgment zone was a thing. And so someone told me I could go and talk to Angela Davis. So I go talk to Angela Davis. And she said to me at the time, this is during the time that Tabitha Gray and John Fobert were here, and Michelle Samuels, all these names, I hope some of them will jar some memories. But the student affairs folks welcomed me. They said, first of all, we got to get you out of that and into graduate living. So then I go on, and because my mom and dad are like ready to cut me off, but they're probably watching and they're not, they didn't cut me off in the end, but at first they were like, you know, like they were disappointed. And look, my kid ends up going on to have a kid early. And so I know what that's about. I know what that's like, but we reconcile all those relationships. But at first they're like, you're gonna have to pay for school yourself. You're gonna have to, you know, take care of your tuition. I'm like, oh my gosh, Marilyn DeBerry, please help. And she did. But the second thing is I realized I don't know the price of Pampers, but I need to be able to take care of this child. And so they told me I could cut some of my educational costs if I was an RA at Lambeth Field. So I go to Lambeth to live because I could live, stay, resume my studies, but also take care of my kid. And then because I'm a musician, but you know, Black Voices is not as open yet to undergrads who have dependents, and they like to hang out a lot. And undergrads with dependents can't always hang out when you want to hang out. So I go down the way to First Baptist Church, which is led by, at the time, Reverend Dr. Bruce Aaron Beard, who, listen, gets his master's and doctorate in theology from Virginia Union, right? So all connected. But I go to First Baptist Church and I start playing so I can take care of my kid. Lambeth Field so I can cut the cost of my education for my parents. I'm saying this because I want you to understand it took all of those efforts, people thinking, strategizing, listening, seeing the good in me, seeing accepting me and respecting me, but understand there's value there and that he just needs support. And I felt like I mattered at UVA, not everywhere, but because of the people who built that knit of support, that network of support for me. We owe it to all students to do that. So that's why, you know, when I speak to academic advisors, their work is so important. When I speak to faculty advisors, their work is so important. When I talk to DEIB people, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging nowadays, their work is so important because it truly does take a village. And I shouted out a lot of my village today, but so many students don't have either that support or, going back to what we talked about earlier, you don't know where to turn. I was just so fortunate that someone told me to go to Angela Davis. I didn't know as a dean of students that she could call shots. She ends up hiring me as a student worker at the front desk to work hourly. I wasn't doing anything glamorous. I mean, answering phones, but it helped put food on the table, take care of some daycare bills. Putting me in Lambeth Field felt like I was being, sort of isolated or extracted from the community. But what I didn't know that I would go on to know is that, one, I could have my kid there. And so there are all sorts of pictures on my social media of my little baby. She's not a little baby anymore, but my little girl, Aaliyah. She has on the UVA cheerleading outfit as a little baby because she was here for a game with her dad, who's a student. And I remember, tell the story, she tells it all better than I. There would be times where I would go to my classes. I took a sociology class one time and I put her in my book bag. I didn't zip it up, but but I held her in the back because I didn't know, like, could you have a kid in class? And what happens and so she cries and people and I'm like, I'm just gonna act like she's not crying. I mean, not my book bag. And then at some point I had to grab the book bag and leave. But if you don't know where support is, what support is available, then it's very easy to feel lonely, to feel on your own and isolated. So anything that we can do, not only to build the support, but to raise awareness of it, to make it easy for students to access supplemental instruction and tutoring, and to get additional support for scholarships or for co-ops and internships, which are so important for students in engineering. Anything that we can do to connect them to it, to make that very seamless for them, is the work of belonging. It will lead to success. All right, so as I close, this is what belonging is all about. It is about cognitive, affective, and behavioral dimensions. So I like to remind people, it is a feeling. You can walk into a space and feel like I belong here. And you've had that moment. You can also walk into a space and feel like, uh-oh, I'm out of place. Nobody here is expecting me. Nobody here wants me. People like me don't belong here. They're not embraced here, not celebrated here. But it's not just a feeling only. It is also about beliefs and mindsets. And so anything that we can do to help students understand, to every single student in the room, listen, just because I'm here as a speaker and a two-time alum of this great place does not mean I got straight A's when I was here. I'm just simply saying that there are certain beliefs that students have that they're the only one who failed the quiz. They're the only ones who don't understand this chemical process, or who don't understand what just happened in lecture. And most of us, especially at places like UVA, are not only socialized and programmed by the institution itself, but come from places where we've learned how to perform competence. Where you look at the lecture and you're like, and you have no idea what you're talking about, right? And you're taking a lot of notes because you're like, God, when I get to my room, I hope this makes sense. I'm gonna have to Google it and YouTube it. And what you need to understand is, one, we've all been there. But two, you're not the only one. That most people, half the people who are not in their head don't have a clue. Not in that moment. But great universities like UVA anticipate that. We expect you to have moments where it won't make sense. And that's why we provide additional support. That's why faculty have office hours. And office hours don't take an hour, sometimes just 15 minutes. And you can set them up online and virtually. And sometimes it doesn't have to be formal like that. You can just say, hey, can I see you after class or before class? But there's also a lot of incredible support at the, so even if writing is not something that you enjoy, that's why we have writing support and writing centers. It's just a matter of getting comfortable asking for help until the university starts being far more proactive in providing the help that you need, anticipating those pitfalls. But to also, so there's an individual body of work. I'm getting ahead of myself, so let me just show you that so you don't think I'm making this up. I've spent a lot of time thinking about the individual level in my work. These days, probably for the last 2 or 3 years, I've been thinking more about the institutional responsibility. Because what I don't want is for people to leave and say, good, okay, Strayhorn said students need to find a sense of belonging. Until they find it, they're not going to be successful. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that for students who want to be successful, there are some things that we can do. We have agency over our own outcomes, that we can create and find and build and co-construct a sense of belonging. And that's great. We can do it. And we have done it. You've already done it because you're here today. But there's also an institutional responsibility, that institutions would set policies and establish practices and engage new programs and also build environments that are free from harassment and bias, that promote equity and standardization of learning. And I don't mean standardization in a way that like curbs or encroaches upon academic freedom. But I'm simply saying, if you know that students need to take math 101 before they take math 201, then make it a requirement so that students don't flip it and start a course that they're going to set up to be fit. Listen, we did this marvelous example. I don't know if you know this one. So it just turns out at Virginia Union, if you take religion 201, you are more likely to pass math 201. And it's because Religion 201 has a lot more to do with like logic and those kind of mechanical, fundamental ways of thinking. It has nothing to do with religion at all. It's just the way the person teaches it. And so rather than have students go to 201 or 203, whatever it is, on their own, we now use that data and information in advising. As the provost, I work with deans to change the sequencing of courses. That means changing the catalog, changing the degree maps so that students get the support and the training they need before they go on to that next level. That's just one small example that has huge implications for the way in which we sequence courses in engineering curriculum, the way in which we can use data analytics and learning analytics to inform decision-making that sets up for student success. So there's a lot that we can do. I think hopefully you cannot read this because the goal is not for you to read all of this. It's simply to say that for each level, so I ground my work on belonging in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and ultimately say, look, I'm not going to argue about the hierarchy, except I will say this, that there are some basic physiological needs. You need air, you need water, you need food, you need a cell phone. Those are just basic physiological needs, right? And if you don't, just try going without one for a while. But there are higher order needs like safety, security, and belonging that get in the way, that are a part of our satisfaction of higher order needs. We want to produce graduates at UVA who are global citizens, who are democratic leaders, who can go out and be creative and innovative, who can experiment, but also have social responsibility. This is not just true in general society, it's particularly true in engineering. We want to equip students with the information to know how to combine, chemicals in ways that can foster productive goals in society. But we also want to balance that with some social responsibility, so they don't take that same education and training out into the world to do harm. Well, the only way we can do that is by first passing through this band that will never produce the graduates we want until we take seriously this notion around belonging in community, in connectedness, and that it's not just touchy-feely spaces, but it's showing up in the curriculum. It's how they navigate the curriculum and the experience, their degree plans. As one student in Nashville at Vanderbilt University in the audience said to me, Dr. Stringer, you forgot one of the most important places where I want to see myself reflected. And I said, where's that, young lady? She said, at the front of the classroom. So we diversify our faculty, and we work with DEIB folks to set up strategies for building pathways into the professoriate, not just at the entry level, but all the way to the full and the senior level administration. We are doing the work of belonging. We're doing the work of student success. I'll stop there. For some questions, any questions, thoughts, reactions? Yes.
So I guess how, in terms of like helping students, helping students with their level of, given that COVID is now impacting like students, like making that transition online to in-person classes, how can institutions support students?
So there are lots of ways that I think institutions, we've alluded to some, right? So we pivoted, being higher education, pivoted to online quickly, overnight, in new and different ways because of COVID. So anything that we do to help students manage that new environment, I think ties to belonging, providing instructions. Listen, we, higher education, have opened the doors of access to higher education to women, people of color, low income, no income, military vets, people living with disabilities. I mean, a wide swath of the population. And so, but now we, in teaching online, have to appreciate everyone doesn't have equal access. So anything that we do to enable access, not just to technology, although that's important, to internet, although that's important, is the work of belonging. I was just having a conversation with UPenn, and they were talking about belonging in this space too. The big question for their campus is, Dr. Strayhorn, should professors require cameras to be on or off? And I spent the whole day with UPenn. It was like 5 hours, 6 hours. I said, listen, I've had my camera on for 6 hours. It's because I'm privileged enough to, one, have stable internet access at home, in the comfort of my home where I can do that. Secondly, I'm privileged enough in this world where I'm not worried that anything's going to happen in my surroundings that I don't want you to be privy to, right? So I pretty much control my home environment. So I'm comfortable having my camera on. And then the third is I have, adequate technology to where I can use a virtual background that blocks out my 4-pound Yorkie, who no doubt is back there, being hyper, that would be a distraction to you. We have to appreciate that's not true for all students. So the answer to that question, to me, is I think that's why I'm not, coming out publicly in support of turning the camera always on, because we have students who live in all sorts of circumstances and backgrounds. I think, one, when we do that, we're doing work of belonging. But for leaders, when we either not establish such policies or prohibit the establishment of such policies in our classrooms as faculty, in our departments as chairs, in our schools as deans, and our universities as provosts, I think we're doing what I would call, in this present moment, equity-minded, anti-racist leadership. So that's another piece there. Let me close too by saying, I often talk about when we, teach in the LMS and we encourage students to do the profile, put a picture, tell us who you are. We model it as instructors by filling it out ourselves. We don't just talk about our publication record and our rank and our tenure, but we might share something like I always talk about my 4-pound Yorkie, my kids, the fact that I eat dessert. You can't tell, but I eat dessert with every single meal, sometimes 2 desserts, because I love them. But that's it. And every time I say it, students laugh, because it takes this person who they think is out here, up there, like down to a level they can relate to. And then when I make an assignment that you have to go read other people's portfolio or profile and talk about some things you share in common or some things that are different. So now I'm putting points, attaching points, credit to getting to know each other. I'm not only fostering belonging in an online environment, I'm acknowledging and recognizing that this kind of connection is important. And this can transport to engineering, to physics, to math, to education. I think those are my examples right now in my head. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much for your talk and your work. I think it's so important as we consider this question around student success. I want to maybe ask you to extend your understanding or your study of belonging to the other players in a university higher education environment. So how do we think about this cultivation of a sense of belonging when we think about our faculty and we think about our staff and their subsequent kind of microcosms of belonging and non-belonging as faculty of color, who are the only faculty of color in their departments or their schools, if it's a predominantly white space, as often invisibilized staff who are, ranked somewhere in what can feel like a caste system in prestigious higher education environments. So how do you see yourself as somebody who's in a senior level administrative position, thinking about extending these questions about student success to, educator success and, institutional partner success?
Yeah, it's critical. I mean, I was at a school in Wisconsin, and professor, I don't think I knew she was a professor at the time, but a woman during this time, crying her eyeballs out. And I told a story about my grandmother that day, so I thought maybe it was a story. Probably it was a little bit. But she comes up to me at the end and she says, listen, I just thought I needed to hear this talk today. And it did it for me. I said, great. I'm thinking this is a good thing. She said, the moment I get back to my office, I'm going to resign from my job. And I was like, don't tell the people who brought me, it's like, she said, no, I got to do it. I owe it to them. I said, owe it to who? She said, my students. She said, I've always been looking for the words for it, but you give me the words, which is, by the way, what theory does. If it does nothing else, it provides constructs for talking about language, for talking about otherwise complex phenomena. Belonging is not so complicated. It actually is a relatively simple concept, but it's difficult for us to put it into words. Nowadays, because we've been using it so much more, it's now in popular culture. You follow me on Twitter. If you don't, I'm TL Strayhorn on Twitter. But I was watching the Today Show, and they had a guest up there, and she was like, you know, I feel like I belong. And so I took a screenshot and tweeted it. It pops up everywhere. My kids now will be watching like 60 Minutes or SVU or something, and they'll, you know, text me and say, oh my gosh, they just said belonging, like the word belongs to me. You know, but it shows up. She says, no, I have to leave because I owe it to them because you gave me the language we're talking about. I've been here at this school for 20 years. And sometimes people still get my name wrong, which always annoys me, and I didn't understand why. And listen, this is what we got to know. Single incidents rarely issue their own meaning. Merely calling me Terrell, not Terrell, doesn't mean anything at all. It's how I interpret that experience that matters most. It's when I interpret the mispronunciation as you don't care. Or I've told you 5 times and you keep doing it. Oh, now you're trying to be funny. You know what? They don't care about me. I've been here for 20 years. They don't understand that my work is devalued. It doesn't get celebrated or recognized. So I was writing a paper this morning or at the hotel, finishing a book chapter. It's when students of color see campuses like this celebrate scholars of color, boost their own belonging. Because it's like people like me and their work is valued, respected, gets celebrated. Not just like a hand clap at a private meeting, but publicly, it shows up on the website. It earns a Jefferson Cup. Do they still give this up? Yeah, Jefferson Cup. I mean, there are all sorts of ways that we can, and so now, think about it. How does it get back to your point, right? So who makes those decisions? Usually faculty and staff serving on committees. You know, I celebrate the work that the university has done in the renaming of buildings. There are people who believe that's just like, that's not big enough to matter. It is, because it's hard to feel like you belong in a place where there are physical structures that remind you that this place was not built for you, or built by people who look like you as workers, but never students. And here you are trying to focus on the lecture, focus on the experiment and not burn the building down. You get distracted by the history. So I think when we understand it, and listen, when we get into places and we can speak and we can talk eloquently and fluently about it, I think we have an opportunity to. So it's a part of my job that I take really important and seriously, that sometimes I've got to go into places where they'll welcome fun size, you know, academics with a lot of hair. And I've got to say some things that we all need to hear because it'll make us better. Doesn't always make you popular. Doesn't mean you get invited to the holiday social every time. That's why you got to somehow just have 2 desserts, celebrate yourself. But you have to sometimes say it to make us better institutions. And that's the commitment that we have. So I close by saying faculty and staff belonging matters. The woman resigns because she said, I've been living a lie. I've been telling students they could come here. And at the orientation, when they come, their parents see me and they immediately, you know, sort of connect. And I tell moms, dads, aunties, uncles, it's going to be okay. I got them. And what I know is it's probably not. Things haven't changed. Hasn't changed for me. So if it hasn't changed for me, I don't know how I could change for them. So let's flip it. Get to your point on the pro-social or positive side is faculty and staff of color become major agents for the institution. You know, the best way to convince students of color that people from your background are parts of this campus community, celebrated members of the campus community, is to show it, not just in word or on a screen, but to show it in our hiring practices. You know, diversify your leadership team, diversify your faculty, show an intentional effort to do so. I think that's what, in my mind, so much of higher education has been struggling to do, in that we often get people in or people stumble into our institutions, and then we sort of use them as tokens. The problem is today's student, I close, today's student is a very, very, very good judge of authenticity. They grew up keeping it real. Like, just keep it real with me. Like, don't play. Like, no, I'm serious. Like, no. Those phrases It's because it's a generation of young people, and young people is like, relatively speaking, I'm not talking like people 40 and under, you know, it's like, it's a generation of people who are so used to people pretending that things are better than they are, you know, lying, fudging, stretching the truth. And so they're looking for institutions. And so this is where I really find some connection to the work. Sense of belonging is about values alignment. So students are looking for institutions that care about the things that they care about. So if I care about social justice and racial justice, inequality and equity, I'm looking for an institution that does the same. And I'm looking for some sign that you do so. And in my fuller deck, I have like, you know, all sorts of signs. There are signs on campus, physical signs that say, you belong here. Black Lives Matter. I was walking downtown, near the downtown area, and I saw all these signs that said like Black Lives Matter and queer lives for Black lives. And these signs are important. But there are other implicit signs that students decode and detect. The same way as mispronunciation of the name. It's like when they come to our institutions, they're looking for some presence. They look at the kinds of clubs and organizations that are available and on display during orientation. Where are people who look like me located in the org? When things get talked about, how do people react to one another? What are the courses that I had to take? Which ones are required and which ones are optional or electives? Because that signals to people. Well, even if we don't mean to, it's time for us to embrace it. It does. Students read it, they interpret it and say, oh, so this is an institution where these kind of things matter and these kind of things are relegated to electives. They don't. Hopefully that gives you a couple of insights to talk about. But I would say, you know, in engineering particularly, Nancy Love, the example I gave earlier, she's a woman, white woman. But in addition to that really wonderful example, I think it's a good example. She goes on to work to recruit the very first scholar of color in her department. She supports this individual, and support takes on a lot of different forms. She introduces her to project officers at the National Science Foundation. Why? Because Nancy knows that her success is going to be tied to her grant dollars. So she builds relationships. She is a sponsor, an advocate for her and her ideas. She is willing to serve on advisory boards to her projects. Why? Because Nancy knows, one, that the funder will feel the weight that Nancy adds by being an advocate for her. But also there are other scholars who are more attracted to serve on the advisory committee because Nancy's there. So there are lots of ways in which we, depending on how we place in the world, with privilege, with oppression, marginalized identities or majority identities, that we all play a role in fostering these connections that lead to belonging and ultimate success. For the sake of time, I'm going to stop there and put this back in the hands of Katie. Yes, thank you all very much.